I am 26 years old. My husband, James, is 27. Our rehearsal dinner was supposed to be a joyous occasion, a final, quiet celebration before the whirlwind of the wedding day. The restaurant was beautiful, filled with the warm glow of candlelight and the low hum of happy conversation. My family and his were mingling, laughing, and for a moment I let myself believe that this merger of two families would be as seamless as our love story. I looked across the table at my mother, Helen. Her eyes were shining with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. She caught my gaze and gave me a small, reassuring smile. Beside me, James squeezed my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my skin. Everything felt perfect. Too perfect. The trouble started, as it often did, with my father-in-law, Arthur. He was a man who commanded attention, not through warmth or wit, but through sheer force of presence. He carried himself with an air of unshakable importance, as if the world were his personal boardroom and everyone in it was a subordinate. His wife, my mother-in-law Brenda, orbited him like a nervous moon, always ready to echo his opinions and soothe any egos he might bruise. When the time came for toasts, Arthur rose from his chair, glass in hand. A hush fell over the room. He started with the usual pleasantries, complimenting the couple, welcoming my family into his. But then his tone shifted. A smug, self-satisfied smile spread across his face. He looked directly at me, then let his gaze sweep over my parents. "Of course," he began, his voice booming slightly. "I think we can all agree that this beautiful wedding, this wonderful union, wouldn't be happening without a little financial help." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. The chatter died completely. Every eye in the room darted between Arthur and my parents. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. It was a cruel, unnecessary comment, designed to do exactly what it was doing: diminish my family and elevate his own. I saw my father's jaw tighten. James shifted uncomfortably beside me, a silent apology in his posture. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. It was a power play, a public declaration that we were indebted to him, that our joy was purchased with his generosity. I looked at my mother. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. For a long second, she just sat there, her hands folded in her lap. Arthur's smile widened, victorious. He had made his point, and no one had dared to challenge him. He raised his glass higher, ready to deliver the finishing blow to his toast. And then, my mother stood up. She didn't jump to her feet or slam her hands on the table. She rose with a slow, deliberate grace that drew every ounce of attention in the room. She didn't look angry. She looked serene, but with a firmness in her eyes that I had only seen a few times in my life. It was the look that meant she had reached a line that would not be crossed. Arthur faltered, his glass still in the air. "Helen?" he asked, a note of irritation in his voice. "Did you want to add something?" My mother looked at him, her gaze level and unwavering. "Yes, Arthur, I do," she said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent room. "Perhaps it would be better if we discussed the specific details of wedding finances in private." The tension in the room became so thick I could feel it pressing on my chest. It was a masterful move. She hadn't accused him of lying, not directly. She had simply suggested that his public pronouncement was inappropriate, while hinting that there was more to the story. She had taken his power play and turned it back on him with a single, polite sentence. Arthur's face, which had been so smug just moments before, began to darken. He was not a man who liked being challenged, especially not by a woman he considered his social and financial inferior. "Helen, don't be so sensitive," he said, trying to laugh it off, but the sound was forced. "We're all family here. There are no secrets between us." "I agree," my mother replied, her voice still perfectly even. "We are all family, which is why it's so important to be accurate." A collective, silent gasp seemed to move through the room. She had called his bluff. She had essentially called him a liar in the most polite, cutting way possible. Brenda shot her a venomous look, her hand reaching out to touch Arthur's arm as if to restrain him. James leaned towards me, his voice a low whisper in my ear. "What is your mom doing?" he asked, his tone a mixture of panic and confusion. "She's setting the record straight," I whispered back, a fierce surge of pride for my mother washing away my earlier shame. Arthur lowered his glass, his face now a mask of cold fury. He stared at my mother for a long moment, the silence stretching into an eternity. He had been publicly contradicted, his grand gesture of generosity thrown back in his face. He opened his mouth to say something else, something surely sharp and condescending, but my father stood up then, placing a steadying hand on my mother's back. "I think Helen is right," my dad said, his voice calm and reasonable. "This is neither the time nor the place. Let's enjoy the evening." The spell was broken. People began to talk again, but the conversations were stilted and quiet. The celebratory atmosphere was gone, replaced by a thick fog of awkwardness. Arthur sat down heavily, his face like thunder. He didn't speak another word for the rest of the dinner. He just sat there, glaring at my mother, who had resumed her seat and was now calmly sipping her water, as if she hadn't just detonated a social bomb in the middle of the room. The rest of the evening was a blur of forced smiles and strained pleasantries. I couldn't wait for it to be over. As we were leaving, Brenda cornered me by the coat check. Her smile was tight and her eyes were cold. "Your mother has a lot of nerve," she hissed, her voice low. "After everything we've done for you." "My mother was just being honest," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. Brenda let out a short, sharp laugh. "Honest? She embarrassed Arthur. She embarrassed our entire family. You should have a word with her, Chloe, before she does any more damage." With that, she turned and swept away, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and confusion. I didn't understand what had just happened. Arthur's comment had been rude, but my mother's reaction seemed disproportionately intense. There was something more going on, a story I didn't know, and I had a sinking feeling that it was going to change everything. Later that night, back in our hotel room, James tried to smooth things over. He was a natural peacemaker, always trying to find the middle ground, to avoid conflict at all costs. It was one of the things I loved about him, but tonight, it felt like a weakness. "I'm so sorry about my dad," he said, pulling me into a hug. He doesn't think before he speaks sometimes. He was trying to be proud in his own weird way." I pulled away from him. "Proud?" "James, he was being a bully. He tried to make my parents look small in front of everyone." "And for what?" "So he could feel like the big man." "I know it came out wrong," he insisted, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "But he and my mom did help out a lot. They paid for the venue. That's not a small thing." I stopped. I stared at him. "They what?" I asked. "They paid for the venue," he repeated, as if this explained everything. "It was their big wedding gift to us. Dad was probably just feeling puffed up about it." I felt a wave of dizziness. The venue was, by far, our biggest expense. My parents and I had sat down months ago and worked out a budget. They had offered a generous amount, and I had been saving for years. We had chosen a venue that was at the very top of our budget, but we had agreed it was worth it. I had never, not once, heard anything about Arthur and Brenda paying for it. "When did this happen?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know. A few months ago, I guess," James said with a shrug. "Dad called me and said he wanted to take care of it. He made me promise not to say anything. He said he wanted it to be a surprise for you and your parents at the dinner." A surprise. The pieces started to click into place, but they were forming a picture I didn't like. Arthur's comment, my mother's steely reaction, Brenda's venomous words. It wasn't just a rude toast. It was a planned ambush. Arthur had intended to reveal his grand gift in the most public, most humiliating way possible, painting himself as the savior of the wedding and my parents as incapable. But my mother hadn't been surprised. She had been prepared. "James," I said, my voice trembling, "I don't think your parents paid for the venue." He looked at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? Of course they did. My dad told me so himself. And my mother just stood up and implied he was lying in front of 50 people. I shot back. Who do you think is telling the truth? The question hung between us, heavy and unanswered. James looked torn. He loved his father, but he knew him. He knew his capacity for arrogance and control. And he knew my mother, a woman who valued honesty above almost everything else. He didn't want to believe his father would lie about something so significant, but the evidence of my mother's reaction was undeniable. I don't know. He finally stammered. There must be some kind of misunderstanding. Yes, I said, my voice cold and hard. I think there is, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it. We went to sleep that night in the same bed, but miles apart. The joy and excitement for our wedding day had been replaced by a knot of dread in my stomach. A battle line had been drawn at the rehearsal dinner, and I was standing right in the middle of it. I didn't know the full story yet, but I knew one thing for sure. The wedding tomorrow was not going to be the happy, carefree day I had dreamed of. It was going to be the backdrop for a family war. And I had no idea who was going to win. The morning of my wedding day dawned bright and clear, but a storm was brewing inside me. I had barely slept, my mind racing, replaying the scene at the dinner over and over again. James was quiet and withdrawn, the tension between us a tangible thing. We were supposed to be giddy with anticipation, but instead we were walking on eggshells around each other. My bridesmaids arrived. A whirlwind of pastel dresses and excited chatter, and I tried to push my anxiety aside. I had to put on a happy face for them, for the photos, for the illusion of a perfect day. But as I sat in the makeup chair, the artist painting a smile onto my face, I felt like a fraud. My mother arrived while I was getting my hair done. She came into the room, and her presence immediately had a calming effect. She hugged my bridesmaids, complimented their dresses, and then came over to me. She looked at my reflection in the mirror, her eyes soft. "You look beautiful, Chloe," she said quietly. "Thanks, Mom," I said, my voice tight. The room was noisy, filled with the sounds of hairspray and laughter. I needed to talk to her, to understand what had happened. Can we talk for a minute? In private?" I asked. She nodded, her expression serious. We went into the adjoining bedroom and closed the door. The sudden silence was a relief. "Honey, I know you have questions," she started, "but today is your wedding day. Let's not let Arthur's foolishness ruin it. We can deal with it later." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I can't just deal with it later. Mom, James told me his parents paid for the venue. He said it was supposed to be a surprise. Is that true?" My mother sighed, a deep, weary sound. She sat down on the edge of the bed. "It's complicated," she said. "Then uncomplicate it for me," I pleaded. "Last night you stood up to him. You wouldn't have done that if it was just a simple misunderstanding. Please just tell me what's going on." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and regret. "I didn't want to tell you," she said. "I didn't want to put you in this position, especially not today. I wanted you to have a perfect day." "It's already not perfect," I said, my voice cracking. "Please, Mom, I need to know." She took a deep breath. "All right," she said. "Arthur and Brenda did offer to pay for the venue. It was back when you first booked it. Arthur called your father, made a big show of it, said it was their gift, that they wanted to make sure you had the wedding of your dreams. He said the money would be wired directly to the venue. We thought it was incredibly generous." I listened, my heart pounding. So James was right. But then, why the drama? "We thanked them," my mother continued, her voice becoming strained. "And we didn't think about it again. The months went by. You were busy with planning. We were helping where we could. Then, about 6 weeks ago, I got a call from the venue coordinator. She was very polite, but she was firm. The final payment was due and they hadn't received it." My blood ran cold. "What?" I was confused, my mom said. I told her that the groom's parents were handling it. She said they had no record of any payment from them and that the deadline was in 3 days. If the balance wasn't paid, you would lose the booking. And your deposit. I sank down onto the bed next to her, my head spinning. So you called Arthur? She nodded. I called him immediately. He was very breezy about it. Oh, is that this week? Don't worry, Helen, I'll get to it. The check is in the mail. That sort of thing. He made me feel like I was overreacting. But the check never arrived, I guessed, a sick feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. No, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. 2 days later, the coordinator called again. Still no payment. She was very apologetic, but she said their hands were tied. I called Arthur again. This time, he was annoyed. He said he was a busy man, that he had important business to attend to. He told me the transfer was being processed and that these things take time. He was so condescending, Chloe. He talked to me like I was a child who didn't understand how the world works. Tears welled in my eyes. I could picture it perfectly. Arthur, in his expensive suit, talking down to my mother, making her feel small and foolish. The deadline was the next day, my mom said, her voice trembling slightly now. I was in a panic. I tried calling Arthur all morning, but he didn't answer. I left messages. I even called Brenda, and she just said, I'm sure Arthur has it handled. You worry too much, Helen. I knew then. I knew they weren't going to pay. So what did you do? I asked, though I already knew the answer. What else could I do? She said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. I couldn't let you lose your wedding venue a month before the day. I couldn't bear the thought of you being so heartbroken and humiliated. So, I went to the bank. Your father and we took the money from our retirement savings. I wired the full amount to the venue that afternoon. The room was silent except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. My mother, my quiet, unassuming mother, had drained her retirement account to save my wedding. And she had done it in secret, bearing the financial and emotional burden alone, just so I wouldn't have to worry. Why didn't you tell me? I choked out. Mom, why? Because I knew what would happen, she said, taking my hand. It would have caused a massive fight. It would have put you and James in an impossible position. Arthur would have twisted the story, made it seem like we were the ones who were ungrateful or impatient. I decided it was better to just pay it and keep the peace. I was going to let him have his little lie. I was going to let him pretend he was the generous one if it meant you could have a happy, peaceful wedding. But last night, I started. Last night he pushed it too far, she said, her eyes hardening again. It's one thing to lie in private. It's another thing to stand up in front of all our friends and family and try to humiliate us. He didn't just want to pretend he paid. He wanted to make sure everyone knew that we supposedly couldn't. He wanted to rub our faces in it. And I couldn't let him do that. I couldn't let him disrespect your father and me like that. Not after what we did. I threw my arms around her, holding on to her tightly. The makeup artist's careful work was probably being ruined by my tears, but I didn't care. The anger I felt towards Arthur was white-hot, a burning rage that eclipsed everything else. He hadn't just been neglectful. This was a calculated act of cruelty. He had deliberately waited until the last possible second, creating a crisis that he likely intended to swoop in and solve, making himself the hero and putting us forever in his debt. My mother had simply preempted his plan, ruining his moment of glory. That's why he was so angry. It wasn't that she had called him a liar. It was that she had outmaneuvered him. Thank you, Mom. I whispered into her shoulder. Thank you for everything. I love you, honey, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Now go get married. Be happy. We'll sort out the rest of this mess later. She pulled away and wiped the tears from my cheeks with her thumb, trying to repair the damage. No more crying, she said with a watery smile. You have a wedding to get to? I nodded, taking a shaky breath. She was right. I had to get through the day. But my definition of sorting out the mess had just changed dramatically. This was no longer about keeping the peace. This was about justice. Arthur had tried to humiliate my family. He had lied to his own son. He had played a sick, manipulative game with the most important day of my life, and I was not going to let him get away with it. As I walked down the aisle, my father on my arm, all I could see was James waiting for me at the altar. He looked so handsome, but his face was etched with worry. He knew something was wrong. But beyond him, in the front row, I saw Arthur and Brenda. Brenda was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, putting on a show of a proud, emotional mother. Arthur was sitting with his arms crossed, a thunderous expression on his face. He still looked furious from the night before. He caught my eye as I approached, and his gaze was pure ice. In that moment, a cold, clear resolve settled over me. I would smile. I would say my vows. I would dance and laugh and toast to our future. I would play the part of the happy bride. But the real celebration, the one I was now looking forward to, would come later. It would come when I exposed Arthur for the liar and manipulator he was. The wedding wasn't the end of the drama. It was just the beginning. The ceremony was beautiful, in a detached, out-of-body sort of way. I said my vows, my voice clear and steady, but the words felt like they belonged to someone else. I was an actress playing a part. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, James kissed me and the crowd erupted in applause. I smiled, but my eyes immediately found Arthur in the front row. He was clapping slowly, mechanically. His face a stony mask. He knew I knew, and he knew that I knew he knew. The war had been silently declared. The reception was held in the very venue that had been the source of all this turmoil. It was a stunning hall with high ceilings and crystal chandeliers, the tables adorned with flowers my mother and I had spent weeks choosing. Looking around at the scene, paid for by my parents' life savings, while Arthur and Brenda accepted congratulations as if they were the generous benefactors, made my blood boil. I had to get through the next few hours. I danced with my father, my head resting on his shoulder. "I know what Mom did," I whispered to him. "Thank you, both of you." He squeezed me tighter. "We would do anything for you, sweetheart," he said. "Don't you worry about him. He's just a small man with a big ego." But I was worried, not for myself, but for my parents. They had sacrificed so much, and Arthur was trying to steal the credit and erase their contribution entirely. Worse, he had cast them as the poor relations, unable to provide for their own daughter. During the dinner, the speeches began. My maid of honor gave a funny, heartfelt toast. James's best man told some embarrassing stories from their college days. Then it was Arthur's turn. My stomach clenched. James shot me a look from across the head table, a silent plea. "Please, let's just get through this." Arthur stood up, tapping his glass for attention. He had that same smug look on his face from the night before. He clearly believed my mother's quiet rebellion had been a momentary lapse, and that he could now reassert his narrative. "I want to welcome Chloe into our family," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, "and to thank her parents, Helen and Robert, for raising such a wonderful young woman." He paused, letting the polite applause die down. "As I was saying last night, before I was so interestingly interrupted," he continued with a pointed glance at my mother, "putting on an event of this scale is no small feat. It takes resources. It takes a certain commitment to excellence." He was doing it again. He was doubling down. I could feel the anger radiating off my mother, who sat ramrod straight in her chair, her jaw set. "And when James and Chloe chose this magnificent venue," Arthur went on, gesturing around the room, "Brenda and I knew we had to step in. We wanted to provide a foundation for them. A beautiful first step on their journey together, and we were only too happy to make that happen for them." He raised his glass. "To James and Chloe, may your life together be as beautiful as this day, a day we were so proud to help create." The room was filled with applause. People were smiling, looking at Arthur with admiration. He had done it. He had successfully painted himself as the magnanimous patriarch. I looked at James. He was staring down at his plate, his ears red with shame. He knew it was a lie, but he was too conditioned by a lifetime of his father's dominance to speak up. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. My mother had tried the subtle approach. It hadn't worked. Arthur had just steamrolled right over it. He would not be shamed into silence. He had to be confronted with undeniable proof. And I would be the one to do it. But not now. Not here. This was my wedding day, and I would not let him ruin it completely. My revenge would be a dish best served cold. For the rest of the reception, I was the perfect bride. I laughed, I danced, I cut the cake with James. But underneath the layers of tulle and lace, I was plotting. I made a mental list. I needed documents. I needed proof. I needed to build a case so airtight that not even Arthur could wriggle his way out of it. The honeymoon was a strange mix of newlywed bliss and covert investigation. We were in a beautiful resort in Hawaii, surrounded by turquoise water and white sand beaches. James was trying his best to be romantic and present, to put the drama behind us, and I tried to meet him halfway. We had wonderful moments, swimming with turtles, hiking to waterfalls, enjoying quiet dinners under the stars. But the anger was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. One afternoon, while James was out surfing, I called my mom. "Mom," I said, getting straight to the point. "I need you to send me everything. The contract with the venue, the emails between you and the coordinator, and the bank statement showing your wire transfer. I need all of it." "Chloe, what are you planning?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I don't want you to start a war with these people. You have to live with them." "I'm not starting a war," I said, my voice hard. "I'm ending one. He's not going to get away with this. He's not going to steal your money and your dignity and face no consequences. Please just send it to me." She hesitated for a moment and then sighed. "All right," she said. "I'll scan everything and email it to you tonight." That evening, the email arrived. I waited until James was asleep, then opened my laptop. The documents loaded one by one, each one a piece of a sordid puzzle. There was the venue contract with the total amount clearly stated. There was the bank statement, showing a withdrawal from my parents' retirement account for the exact balance, and the subsequent wire transfer to the venue. My hands were shaking as I opened the next file. The email chain with the venue coordinator, a woman named Sarah. I scrolled through the messages. The first few were from my mom, politely inquiring about the payment status. Then there were Sarah's replies, confirming that no payment had been received from Arthur. The tone grew more urgent as the deadline approached. My mother's panic was palpable even in her typed words. But then I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. It was an email from Sarah to my mom, dated 1 week before the final payment was due. Subject: urgent. Regarding your booking. Dear Helen, I'm writing to you because I received a very strange phone call this morning. A man identifying himself as Robert, the bride's father, called and requested to cancel the booking for Chloe's wedding. He stated that the family was having some unexpected financial difficulties and would be unable to proceed with the event. I thought this was unusual, as my contact information has always been with you. Something about the call felt off. I wanted to confirm this cancellation request with you directly before taking any action. Please let me know if this is correct. Best, Sarah. I had to read the email 3 times before the full weight of it sank in. Arthur hadn't just neglected to pay. He had actively tried to sabotage the wedding. He had called the venue, lied about his identity, and tried to cancel the entire thing. He had slandered my family, claiming we were broke. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the sheer malice of it. This wasn't just about ego anymore. This was a deliberate, calculated plot. He was going to let the venue get canceled. He would have waited until I was devastated, my wedding in ruins. Then he would have swept in, the magnanimous hero, and fixed everything. He would have rebooked the venue, or found a new one, and his generosity would have been undeniable. He wouldn't have just been the man who helped pay. He would have been the man who saved the entire wedding from the brink of disaster, a disaster he himself had engineered. And we would have been so grateful, so indebted to him, that we would never have been able to escape his control. My mother, by simply calling and paying the bill, had unknowingly thwarted his entire scheme. No wonder he was so furious. She hadn't just wounded his pride, she had dismantled his entire trap. I felt sick. This was a man I had just welcomed into my family, a man my husband loved and respected. And he was a monster, a petty, cruel manipulator who was willing to destroy his own son's happiness to feed his ego. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling with rage. The game had changed. This was no longer about getting my parents' money back. This was about exposing Arthur for who he truly was. I had the proof in black and white. But an email chain wasn't enough. I needed a human voice. I needed to talk to Sarah. The next day, I told James I wanted to spend the afternoon by the pool reading. As soon as he was gone, I found a quiet corner and called the venue. I asked for Sarah, my heart pounding. "Sarah, hi, my name is Chloe," I began, my voice unsteady. "I was the bride from the wedding on the 15th. I know this is an unusual request, but I need to talk to you about my father-in-law, Arthur." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm not sure I'm at liberty to discuss other clients," she said professionally. "I know," I said, my voice dropping. "But I think he did something wrong, and he's trying to humiliate my parents. My mom forwarded me your email, the one about the cancellation call." Another pause, longer this time. "Your mother is a very nice woman," Sarah said finally, her tone softening. She was under a lot of stress. "She was," I agreed. "Sarah, please, I just need you to tell me what happened." He stood up at my wedding and took credit for paying for the entire thing. He made my parents, who actually paid for it, look like they did nothing. I need to understand what he did. I could hear her sigh. "Look, it's not really my place." "He told my entire family that my parents were broke." I cut in, my voice desperate. "He lied and said he had to step in and save the wedding. But your email? It sounds like he did the opposite. It sounds like he tried to ruin it. Please, I just need the truth." There was a long silence. I held my breath, praying she would help me. "Off the record?" she asked finally. "Off the record," I promised. "The man who called," she began, her voice low. "He didn't sound like your father. I'd spoken to your dad, Robert, once before, very briefly, and this man's voice was different. More arrogant. He said his name was Robert, but he was very forceful. He said the bride's family had run out of money and that we needed to cancel the contract immediately. He wanted the deposit refunded to him personally. That was the biggest red flag. The deposit is non-refundable, and even if it were, it would go back to the original payer, which was your mother." I felt a fresh wave of nausea. He wasn't just trying to sabotage the wedding, he was trying to steal the deposit too. "He got very angry when I told him that," Sarah continued. "He started yelling, saying he was a very important man and that he would ruin our venue's reputation. It was all very ugly. That's when I knew I had to call your mother. The whole thing stank." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much for telling me this." "He sounds like a real piece of work," she said with a sympathetic sigh. "I'm sorry you have to deal with that. Would you—" I hesitated, my heart pounding. "This is a huge thing to ask, but would you be willing to write down what you just told me? In a statement? Just the facts. That a man called, claimed to be my father, tried to cancel, and tried to have the deposit sent to him." There was another long silence. I knew I was asking her to stick her neck out, to get involved in a nasty family dispute. "I'll have to think about it," she said slowly. "Let me talk to my manager, but I'll consider it. What he did was wrong." We hung up and I sat there by the pool, the tropical paradise around me fading into the background. I had him. The email was damning, but a signed statement from a neutral third party was a cannonball. It was irrefutable. But there was still a missing piece. Why? Why go to such extreme, malicious lengths? It couldn't just be about ego. There had to be something more. I thought about what Sarah had said. He wanted the deposit refunded to him personally. He was trying to get money. An idea began to form in my mind, a dark and unsettling one. I needed to talk to someone on the inside, someone who might know the truth about Arthur's financial situation. And there was only one person who might be willing to help me, James's sister, Clara. Clara had always been the black sheep of the family. She was quieter, more observant, and had a cynical streak that often put her at odds with her father's bombastic personality. We weren't close, but we had always been friendly. She had seemed genuinely happy for us at the wedding, and I had caught her rolling her eyes more than once during Arthur's speeches. She was a long shot, but she was my only shot. That night, I told James I wanted to call Clara to thank her for her wedding gift. His face lit up. He was desperate for any sign of normalcy, any bridge back to his family. I went into the bathroom for privacy and dialed her number, my hands sweating. "Chloe, hi," she answered, sounding surprised but pleased. "How's the honeymoon?" "It's amazing," I said, forcing a cheerful tone. "I'm just calling to thank you for the beautiful vase. It's perfect." "Oh, I'm so glad you like it," she said. We made small talk for a few minutes about the wedding, the resort, the weather. Then I took a deep breath and pivoted. "Listen, Clara," I said, my voice dropping. "I have to ask you something, and it's a little weird. And I need you to be really honest with me." "Okay," she said, her tone immediately cautious. "What's up?" "It's about your dad," I said, "and the wedding finances. He's been telling everyone that he paid for the venue, and, well, he didn't. My mom did." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I thought for a second she had hung up. "Clara, are you there?" "I'm here," she said, her voice flat. "And I'm not surprised." My heart leaped. "You're not?" "No," she said with a bitter little laugh. "That sounds exactly like him. He's all about the performance, the appearance of wealth and generosity. The actual follow-through? Not so much." "It's worse than that," I said. And I told her everything. I told her about the lie, the last-minute panic, my mother draining her savings. I even told her about the phone call to the venue, how Arthur had tried to cancel the whole thing. When I was finished, there was another long silence. "That's," she started, and then stopped. "That's a new low, even for him." "I don't understand why he would do it," I said. "It's so evil." Clara sighed heavily. "It's about money, Chloe," she said. "It's always about money with him. He's been in a really tight spot for the last year or so. A couple of big investments went south. He's been scrambling to keep up appearances. He's mortgaged to the hilt." It was like the final, crucial piece of the puzzle sliding into place. "So the money he promised us? It probably never existed," Clara finished for me. "He promised it to lock in his role as the great provider. Then, when the bill came due, he panicked. My guess is, he tried to cancel the wedding so he wouldn't be exposed. He'd blame the venue, or your parents, or the economy. He would have spun some story. And trying to get the deposit back? That's just desperation. He's probably bleeding cash." It all made a horrible kind of sense. His grand promise was a bluff. His cruelty was the lashing out of a cornered animal. He was willing to ruin his son's wedding to hide the fact that he was not the wealthy, powerful man he pretended to be. His entire identity was a sham, and he would destroy anyone who threatened to expose it. "I can't believe it," I whispered. "Believe it," Clara said, her voice grim. "Welcome to the family, Chloe. Now you see what it's really like." "What do I do?" I asked, my mind reeling. "What do you want to do?" she countered. I thought of my mother's face at the rehearsal dinner. I thought of my father's quiet dignity. I thought of the retirement account they had emptied. And I thought of Arthur, standing in front of everyone, basking in the glory of a lie. I want my parents' money back, I said, my voice shaking with a cold, hard anger. And I want everyone to know exactly what he did. There was a pause. And then Clara spoke, her voice firm. Good, she said. It's about time someone stood up to him. What do you need from me? The honeymoon was over. It was time to go home and go to war. The flight home was tense. James knew I had been on the phone with my mom and his sister for a long time, and he could feel the shift in me. The simmering anger had cooled into a steely resolve. I was no longer just hurt. I was on a mission. You're quiet, he said, as our plane descended towards our home city. I'm thinking, I replied. About what? He asked, though I think he already knew. About your father, I said, turning to look at him, and about what we're going to do about him. James flinched. Chloe, can we please just let it go? The wedding is over. It was beautiful. Let's just move on. Move on? I asked, my voice dangerously low. Your father tried to ruin our wedding. He lied to everyone. He slandered my family. And he essentially stole tens of thousands of dollars from my parents. And you want me to just let it go? He didn't steal it, James argued weakly. Your mom chose to pay it. She chose to save her daughter's wedding from the disaster your father engineered. I shot back, my voice rising. People in the rows around us glanced over. I lowered my voice to a harsh whisper. He backed her into a corner, James. He gave her no choice. And he did it all to cover up his own financial problems and to feed his disgusting ego. James looked stunned. What financial problems? I told him what Clara had said. I laid it all out. The bad investments, the desperate need to maintain appearances, the fact that the money he had promised us likely never existed in the first place. James stared out the window, his face pale. He was seeing his father not as the infallible patriarch he had always known, but as a desperate, flawed man. It was a painful, seismic shift in his worldview. I didn't know, he whispered. Of course you didn't, I said, my tone softening slightly. He didn't want you to know. He didn't want anyone to know. That's the whole point. His entire life is a performance, but the show is over, James. The curtain is coming down, and he is going to pay my parents back every single cent. How? James asked, looking lost. If he doesn't have the money, he has assets, I said coldly. He has a house. He has cars. He will figure it out. Because the alternative is that I tell everyone, and I mean everyone, the truth, with proof. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was an email. The subject line was statement. It was from Sarah at the venue. I opened it, my heart pounding. There it was. A signed PDF on company letterhead detailing Arthur's phone call, his lies, and his attempt to have the deposit refunded to him. The final piece of my arsenal was in place. When we landed, the first thing I did was call my parents. I told them I was home and that I was handling it. My mom begged me to be careful. My dad just said, "You do what you think is right, Chloe. We're behind you." Then I called Clara. "I'm back," I said. "And I have a signed statement from the venue coordinator." I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "You work fast," she said, a note of admiration in her voice. "So what's the plan?" "Your parents have invited us over for a post-wedding family dinner this weekend," I said. "They want to look at photos and relive their moment of glory. I think that would be the perfect time for a conversation." "A confrontation, you mean?" Clara said. "That's the word," I confirmed. "Will you be there?" "Wouldn't miss it for the world," she replied. The next few days were a strange limbo. James was walking on eggshells around me. He was caught in an impossible position, torn between his loyalty to his wife and his lifelong deference to his father. I knew he was scared. Scared of the confrontation, scared of the fallout, scared of what it would do to his family. You don't have to be there, I told him the night before the dinner. I can do this myself. He looked at me, his eyes filled with turmoil. No, he said, shaking his head. He's my father. I have to be there. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I said, taking his hand. Just stand with me. That's all I need. He nodded, squeezing my hand. Okay, he whispered. Okay. I knew in that moment that he had made his choice. He was with me. The day of the dinner arrived. I dressed carefully, in a simple, severe black dress. I felt like a general preparing for battle. In my purse, I had a folder. Inside was a copy of my mother's bank statement, a copy of the email chain between her and Sarah, and at the very top, a pristine printed copy of Sarah's signed statement. We drove to his parents' house in silence. When we arrived, Brenda greeted us at the door with air kisses and effusive compliments. Chloe, you're still glowing. And James, my handsome boy, she chirped, her voice grating on my nerves. Arthur was in the living room, a large glass of scotch in his hand. He looked relaxed, confident, back on his home turf. There they are, he boomed. Come in, come in. Your mother has made a wonderful meal. We have the photo albums all ready to go. My parents arrived a few minutes later, followed by Clara. The atmosphere was immediately thick with unspoken tension. My mother was polite but distant. My father was a quiet, solid presence at her side. Clara gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. We sat down to dinner. Brenda chattered on about the wedding, about how beautiful everything was, how all their friends were still talking about it. Arthur soaked it all in, nodding and smiling, the benevolent king in his castle. That venue is just spectacular, Brenda said, looking at Arthur with adoration. You have such an eye for quality, dear. Only the best for my boy, Arthur said, puffing out his chest. He turned to me. I hope it was everything you dreamed of, Chloe. This was it, the opening I had been waiting for. I put down my fork and looked him directly in the eye. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my voice came out calm and steady. Arthur, I said, we need to talk about the venue. The table went silent. Brenda's smile froze on her face. James tensed beside me. Arthur raised an eyebrow, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. We are talking about it, he said dismissively. It was a wonderful choice, wasn't it? It was a beautiful choice, I agreed, my voice as cold as ice. Especially since my mother was the one who paid for it. The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Brenda let out a small, horrified gasp. Clara looked down at her plate, a tiny smile playing on her lips. My parents said nothing, their faces impassive. Arthur's face began to turn a deep, mottled red. What did you just say? He asked, his voice a low growl. I said my mother paid for the venue, I repeated, enunciating each word clearly. She paid the entire balance in full after you failed to do so. That is a ridiculous, slanderous accusation, he sputtered, slamming his hand down on the table. The plates and glasses rattled. We gave Helen the cash. It was a private arrangement, to save her the embarrassment of having to admit she couldn't afford it. The lie was so audacious, so shameless that I almost laughed. He was doubling down even now. He was trying to twist my mother's sacrifice into an act of pity on his part. A private arrangement? I asked, my voice dripping with mock curiosity. That's interesting, because I have a copy of the wire transfer right here. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder. I slid the first document, my mother's bank statement, across the table towards him. The line showing the large withdrawal and the transfer to the venue was highlighted in yellow. This is from my mother's retirement account, Arthur. Do you really want to stick with the story that you gave her cash? He stared at the paper as if it were a snake. He was trapped, but he wasn't ready to give up. "This proves nothing," he blustered. "It was a reimbursement. We had an agreement." Brenda jumped in to support him. "Helen, how could you let your daughter do this?" she cried, turning to my mother. "After all we've done, this is a betrayal." My mother looked at her, her expression unyielding. "The only betrayal here, Brenda, was your husband's," she said quietly. "It's true that you had an agreement," I said, my voice cutting through Brenda's hysterics. "You agreed to pay, and then you didn't. And then you did something much, much worse." I took the second document from my folder, the email chain. I didn't give it to him. I handed it to James. "Read the last email, James," I said softly. "The one from Sarah." James took the paper, his hands shaking. He read it, his face growing paler with every word. He looked up, his eyes wide with horror, first at me, then at his father. "Dad, what is this?" he whispered. "It says you tried to cancel the wedding." "It's a lie, a fabrication," Arthur roared, rising from his chair. "That woman is lying. Chloe probably paid her to write that." "You think so?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "You think a professional venue coordinator would risk her job and her company's reputation to lie for me?" "That seems unlikely. But I thought you might say that. So I got something a little more official." I took out the final piece of paper. The crown jewel of my collection. Sarah's signed statement on official letterhead. "This is a signed statement from Sarah," I announced to the room. "She confirms that a man called, pretending to be my father, Robert. She confirms that he tried to cancel the wedding, claiming my family was broke. And she confirms that he tried to get the non-refundable deposit paid back to him personally. She even noted that he became aggressive and threatening when she refused." I didn't give the statement to Arthur. I handed it directly to Clara. "Clara, would you mind reading this aloud for everyone?" Clara took the statement, a grimly satisfied look on her face. She stood up and, in a clear, steady voice, she read every word. She read about the phone call, the lie about being my father, the slander against my family's finances, the attempt to steal the deposit, the verbal abuse. With every word she read, Arthur seemed to shrink. The color drained from his face. His blustering rage collapsed into a deflated, hollow shock. He was exposed. Utterly and completely. There was no way to spin this. No way to talk his way out of it. The proof was undeniable, and it was being read aloud by his own daughter. When Clara finished, she placed the paper back on the table. The silence in the room was deafening. No one looked at Arthur. Brenda was staring at her husband with a look of dawning horror, as if seeing him for the first time. Finally, James spoke. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He was no longer the scared, conflicted boy. His voice was shaking, but not with fear. It was with a deep, profound anger. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking with a pain that was almost physical. "How could you? You lied to me. You lied to everyone. You tried to ruin our wedding. You tried to humiliate the woman I love and her family. For what? For money? For your ego?" Arthur opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just stood there, swaying slightly, his face a ruin. "I have spent my entire life looking up to you," James continued, tears now streaming down his face. "I have spent my entire life defending you, making excuses for you. And this is who you are. A liar, a bully, a thief." He turned to me, his eyes full of regret. "I'm so sorry, Chloe," he said. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you." Then he looked at my parents. "Helen, Robert, I am so deeply sorry for what my father did to you." He turned back to Arthur, his face hard. "You will pay them back," he said, his voice no longer shaking. It was a command. "You will pay back every single dollar. I don't care how you do it. You will sell whatever you have to. You will make this right." He took my hand. "We're leaving," he said. He looked at his mother, who was now openly weeping. "And until you have paid my wife's parents back, do not contact me. Do not contact either of us." We walked out of the room, leaving the wreckage of the family behind us. My parents and Clara followed a moment later. As the front door closed behind us, I heard a single choked sob from inside. The king had been dethroned. The castle had crumbled. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The carefully constructed world that Arthur had built for himself shattered in a single evening. The dinner party became the stuff of family legend, a story whispered among aunts, uncles, and cousins. Clara, having seen the truth laid bare, made sure of that. She was no longer the quiet, cynical observer. She was a woman who had found her voice, and she used it to dismantle her father's reputation piece by piece. The first few days were a flurry of angry phone calls and text messages, not from Arthur, but from Brenda. She accused me of destroying their family. She called me manipulative and cruel. She pleaded with James to be reasonable and forgive his father. James, to his eternal credit, was a rock. He answered her first call. I heard his side of the conversation, his voice firm and unwavering. "Mom, this is not Chloe's fault. This is Dad's fault. He did this. There is nothing to discuss until he pays back the money he owes the people he tried to ruin. Do you understand?" There was a pause. "No, I am not being brainwashed. I am finally seeing things clearly. Goodbye." He blocked her number after that. The pressure campaign then shifted to other relatives. A few of Arthur's siblings, who had benefited from his feigned generosity over the years, called to tell us we were being disrespectful. We were tearing the family apart over a simple misunderstanding. I answered one of those calls from an uncle named Mark. "You're young," he said condescendingly. "You don't understand how things work. Sometimes in a family, people make mistakes. You have to be willing to forgive." Was it a mistake when he lied about paying for the venue? I asked calmly. Was it a mistake when he tried to cancel the wedding? Was it a mistake when he tried to steal my parents' deposit? Was it a mistake when he slandered my family, claiming we were destitute? Which one of those was the mistake, Mark? Because to me it looks like a plan. He stammered, caught off guard by my directness. "Well, Arthur can be proud. He can be whatever he wants," I cut in. "But he's also going to be a man who pays his debts. The conversation ends there." I hung up. The real leverage, however, was not just the family's disapproval. It was the threat of public exposure. I had a copy of Sarah's statement. It was a professional document, a damning indictment of Arthur's character. He was a man who cared deeply about his reputation in his community and his business circles. The thought of that statement getting out, of his business partners or golf buddies learning that he was not only a liar, but also financially unstable, was his worst nightmare. About a week after the disastrous dinner, we received a letter from Arthur's lawyer. It was a formal, stuffy document proposing a confidential settlement to resolve the recent family discord. It offered to pay my parents back half the amount in installments over the course of 2 years, in exchange for a signed non-disclosure agreement and the destruction of all incriminating documents. I laughed out loud when I read it. He was still trying to negotiate, to control the situation. He was still trying to buy our silence for pennies on the dollar. I had James's lawyer, a friend of his from college, draft a response. It was short and to the point. We rejected their offer. We demanded the full amount, transferred in a single lump sum within 30 days. We made no mention of an NDA. We made it clear that our silence was not for sale. The letter ended with a simple, chilling sentence. "We trust that a public airing of the facts surrounding this matter will not be necessary." It was a declaration of war, and Arthur knew he had no weapons left to fight with. 2 weeks later, a check for the full amount arrived at my parents' house via courier. My mother called me, her voice choked with tears. "It's here, Chloe," she said. "The full amount. I can't believe it." "I can," I said. "It's your money, Mom. It always was." That evening, my parents took me and James out to a quiet, celebratory dinner. My dad raised his glass. To Chloe, he said, his eyes shining with pride, for fighting for what's right, and to James for standing by her. My mother looked at me, her face glowing with relief. The weight of the financial burden and the public humiliation had been lifted. She looked younger, lighter. I'm putting this money right back where it belongs, she said. And then your father and I are finally going to take that trip to Italy we've been dreaming about. The fallout for Arthur and Brenda was devastating, and it was entirely of their own making. To raise the money, Arthur had to sell one of his prized classic cars, a vintage Porsche he used to parade around town. It was a small thing, but for a man whose identity was built on material possessions, it was a significant blow. Word got out, as it always does in small circles, and the rumors about his financial troubles, which Clara had confirmed, began to solidify into accepted fact. He and Brenda became isolated. Clara kept her distance, speaking to her mother only occasionally and refusing to see her father at all. Other family members, once they understood the full scope of Arthur's deception, began to pull away. The invitations to parties and family gatherings dried up. He had built his position as patriarch on a foundation of lies and financial intimidation, and when that foundation was exposed, the entire structure came crashing down. He was no longer the respected, powerful head of the family. He was just a bitter old man in a big house, a man who had traded his son's love and respect for a few moments of hollow glory. My relationship with James, which had been tested by the fire of this conflict, emerged stronger than ever. He had been forced to confront the ugly truth about his father, to dismantle the image he had held his entire life. It was a painful process, but it was a necessary one. He had chosen his own family, the one we were building together, over the toxic dynamics of the one he came from. He had chosen me. A few months after the check cleared, I was having coffee with Clara. Our relationship had blossomed from a tentative alliance into a genuine friendship. We had bonded over our shared experience of standing up to her father. Have you spoken to him? I asked. She shook her head. No, Mom calls sometimes. She says he's quiet, sits around the house all day. She says he blames you. He says you turned his own children against him. I sipped my coffee. He did that all by himself. I know, she said. She looked at me, a small, sad smile on her face. You know, for years I watched him bully and manipulate everyone around him. I always just kept my head down. I thought it was easier. But you didn't. You fought back. You showed me that it was possible. Her words meant more to me than she could ever know. The fight hadn't just been about money or pride. It had been about drawing a line. It had been about refusing to be made small. That night, as I lay in bed next to James, I thought about Arthur. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't even feel pity. I just felt a quiet sense of finality. He had spent his life trying to control everyone, to make them bend to his will. He believed that money was power, and that power gave him the right to do whatever he wanted. But he was wrong. True power isn't about control. It's about truth. And in the end, the truth had set us all free. It had freed my parents from a debt they never should have had to pay. It had freed James from the shadow of a toxic father. It had freed Clara from a lifetime of silent resentment. And it had freed me from the fear of a man who tried to break me. He had wanted to teach me and my family our place. Instead, we had taught him his. He had finally learned what it feels like to have no power, no influence, no one to impress. He had learned what it feels like to be truly, utterly small. And that was a victory more satisfying than any amount of money.